chosen topics of conversation were, the top ones were allergens, food safety culture, listeria and campylobacter. And so what we're going to do is start off with allergens. And those of you who know me will know that I've been quite hot under the collar about this subject. And we have now got a new SI, which was passed on the 5th of September 2019. This SI makes it a legal requirement for foods that are what's called pre-packed for direct sale to be fully labelled. There was a consultation, and many of those responding to the consultation, including UK Hospitality, wanted to see a change in legislation that involved putting a sticker on foods to make consumers aware that the food was actually different to a manufactured sandwich, which is really where all this started. But what we have ended up with is a full labelling requirement for any food which is pre-packed for direct sale. So, first question then, really, in all of this journey, is what is pre-packed for direct sale? Because there's no legal definition. So we've got law that refers to something in this brand spanking new bit of legislation, and there is no definition of the very word that everybody actually needs to know about. Well, the truth of the matter is that the consultation has just come out today, so go online and have a look. And we have been fighting and fighting and still fighting, and it looks as though they are going to make it that it is anything that is pre-packed and offered for sale. So basically anything in a single wrapping on a premises could get incorporated into the scope. So that would mean that if you prepared a sandwich in advance for the lunchtime rush, which lots of people do, lots of small sandwich shops do, and you have them behind the counter, they would still need to have a full label on them. That is the direction of travel. Please have a look at the consultation and please respond to it appropriately. Is there any sense in having a label on a food that the consumer can't see before they make that decision to buy? That's the question. So, I've just set a bit of a scene. And you know, interestingly, I was talking to a group of EHOs 2 weeks ago in Wales, and they actually said, the Food Standards Agency were there, and they didn't even mention in their presentation on PPDS food the fact that there isn't a definition of it. Very, very strange. So what we would like to have a conversation about really is what's up on here. Where should that scope for PPDS foods actually draw the line? What are the unintended consequences of labelling PPDS foods? So all those sandwich shops that are now going to have to label. Should menus have full labelling? Is that the next thing that's coming? And what are the most important controls in your opinion in relation to general allergen management? And finally, should make and tailors be banned? So Sterling, what do you think, from your experience in manufacturing really, what do you think about the capability of small businesses to actually produce a full label?
Well, the only thing that kept me awake at night in manufacturing was allergens. I didn't care about other things, it was just allergens. And we had 2,000 people in the factory that I looked after. And the problem was we kept making mistakes. We put the right crisp into the wrong crisp packet. Now, you think that would be impossible, but it's very easy to do. Or the wrong crisp into the right packet, because everything looks so similar. Now, if you're doing salt and vinegar, well, it's all blue. And it's very easy to get confused between different type of customers and different products. And to be honest with you, we had a team of 40 technical people. And I had some of the best technical managers I've ever seen. And we could not control allergen labelling. I put my hand on my heart and say, we had problems. We sent stuff out that had the wrong allergens on, that was underdeclared. And I'm thinking, if I had such a hard time with such a massive resource, I just wonder what it's like if you're in a small mum and pop sandwich place that employs maybe 3 people. How are those people going to do a full label, get the allergens right, and then make sure they put the right label on the wrong pack or vice versa? So Lisa, that was my experience.
Okay, well I think that was one of the things that I'm worried about, because talking to the likes of Salsa, they're sort of saying, well, for somebody to get a label right, it costs many thousands of pounds to get the technology, to have it verified. Yeah, and certainly the RSPH did a survey to actually try to identify whether businesses understood about allergen management some years ago. And I think one of the problems is we've all got distracted now into the labelling side of things, whereas in fact there's still a long way to go on allergen management. And that is something that I know I was talking with UK hospitality hat on to the Food Standards Agency a long time ago, and it's all gone, it's gone quiet. They want to resurrect it, but of course we've got this great big hurdle to get through with this SI. What I'm worried about personally is the lack of dialogue that this is going to bring about, because basically we're going to have someone going into a shop, looking at a label and thinking they don't need to ask any questions. And it's that very lack of dialogue, and it's almost perverse that the whole reason that they wanted this legislation was to differentiate between a Marks and Spencer sandwich and a sandwich made in a catering environment, whereas in fact what this legislation is doing is making them look exactly the same, when we know that they're absolutely not the same. I mean, if you were a small business, what would you put on your sandwiches? Any other unintended consequences? I've certainly seen a couple already. One was in a little botanical gardens my parents like to go to, and they always used to have their homemade sandwiches out on a chilled display, and the whole counter was just completely closed down. That's the second time now, so it wasn't a breakdown, it was just they said, oh, no, we have to ask if you want a sandwich to be made.
Lisa and I live in Bath. In separate houses, by the way. When I say Lisa's my partner, Lisa always says, I'm not that type of partner. And Bath has been particularly affected by allergen deaths. And we had a young teenager who died 2 years ago who went into a kebab shop and ate a kebab and went into anaphylaxis. She wasn't allergic to meat. She was allergic to dairy and milk. And what she didn't realise is kebab contains a lot of dairy products. So she went in there as a young person, didn't really want to talk about her condition, young people don't, made the assumption there's no dialogue. She didn't say to the owner, hey, have you got milk in that kebab? And the owner didn't turn around to her and say, do you have an allergen? And I think that illustrates it is that conversation that is going to be cut down. We want people really to ask those questions on both sides of the counter.
Yeah, on the delivery platforms, I'm thinking. Yeah. I mean, this is obviously something that's being looked at. In fact, we're just having a meeting on this very subject just now about how we can, help to improve that communication process. And the whole thing about allergens really is communication, because at the end of the day, we're talking about a very small section of the population who need to be protected specially. And it's my passionate belief that we need to take special care of them rather than just lumping everybody into the same label and hoping for the best. Because by taking special care, by the dialogue from the allergic person to the business and business back to the allergic person, you're going to get the best possible attention if we've got all those other things in play. But the problem I'm seeing, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, I'm noticing foods not being wrapped anymore. Anyone notice that? Because if you have a requirement that pre-packed food has to be labelled, then if you wanted to avoid having to do that, what's the best thing to do? Not to have a wrapping. And of course, as soon as you don't have a wrapping, you've got cross-contamination issues and cross-contact issues. And also, if it's a sandwich, it's going to start curling up at the corners and not being very nice. But particularly seeing this in the baguette market, where you just see them all stacked up. So you have a fish next to a cheese, next to something else, an egg, everything else all piled up. Now, obviously, those are not going to be suitable for anybody with a particular allergen. The other thing that is not being considered is those list of 100 allergies that people have. So we're getting reports of people being allergic to a lot of things that are not on the list of 14. And what's interesting about those foods is that, of course, there won't be a may contains on the manufacturer's label for a tomato or a mushroom or a pine nut, because they're not one of the 14. So again, the dialogue is really important in relation to cross-contact. So I've heard of 2 very serious incidents involving cross-contact. One was pine nuts. It was someone who went to a hotel, told them they had an allergy to pine nuts. The hotel stripped the whole place bare of pine nuts, said there was absolutely nothing going on in the way of pine nuts in the whole hotel. Very posh hotel, lovely. Anyway, guy comes and gets costed off in an ambulance with his anaphylactic shock from pine nuts. The hotel just can't understand where that cross-contact occurred because there were no pine nuts in the building. And they checked all the packaging. So anyway, stupidly, they invited him back for a free holiday. So he came back and exactly the same thing happened. And then, so they rang me and said, what shall we do? And I said, well, you'll just have to tell him you can't have him to stay, unfortunately. Give him a refund, but you can't do this. And I've had another similar one with mushroom that was not declared as a may contains in a bouillon. And again, very, very severe reaction to the mushroom in a gravy. So, there's a huge amount of other stuff going on that makes life very, very difficult in allergy land for those who are allergic, but also, of course, those on the receiving end of this, the people who are having to actually try to serve safe food. And what I'm slightly worried about is sometimes if we overmanage allergens, we may actually find ourselves or the consumer in a worse position. And a typical example of that is on a buffet. And I've got a classic sign on one of my slides where the buffet says, please put all the tongs back in the right place to protect our allergic customers. Well, I'm sorry, but if I were an allergic customer, I would not touch the buffet with a barge pole. And sometimes, the allergen management that they were trying ever so hard to implement could actually give a very false sense of security to people who thought, well, that must be okay then. We can trust all those other people who've come into here not to handle the almond croissants and then handle an ordinary croissant. It's incredible, isn't it, that we could actually drive a business which could poison or kill loads of people, and yet we're not allowed to drive a car without a license.
As we'll come on to later, I think food safety is about people. And you're right, I got a lot of empathy with you about licensing premises, but what we can learn from our American cousins is they license a person. You can't have a food premise unless you have a licensed, trained person who's managing the premises, and I think that's a big issue for us, because we don't dictate. Someone has to have a license to operate in this
license to kill.
Well, my personal opinion is I do think that if we're not careful, we're increasing the risk, because there's that false sense of security. For some reason, if you put a label on something, people will trust it, even though there are lots of risks. And we are closing down that conversation. When I was in a restaurant last week, the first thing the waitress said to me was, have you got any allergies? And that's a really simple way of dealing with a problem. Everyone asks that question. And to me it meant, well, if they're doing allergies right, then the kitchen must be okay. It gives you confidence that maybe the food safety is good if they're taking that proactive step.
So I'm surprised Leon do it, because they're very, very busy. And I went in, I had a cup of coffee, and then I went and got my colleague a cup of coffee, and I got asked twice. And they did it very quickly, and obviously I didn't say, yeah, I've got an allergy, so it didn't take any time. But in restaurant businesses, what I've found is when people actually do ask that question, the number of allergy complaints has gone down. And so that's very interesting. And the other fact that you might want to take away is that in many big businesses where they collect allergen complaints, 40% of the allergen complaints are from people who did not declare their allergy to the restaurant in the first place. So in other words, they were guessing. They were just taking a punt on what was on the menu, or they used Dr. Google to see if there's egg in a cocktail. And there's a prosecution going on about
You've got a PhD in allergens, like Hazel. Do you know Hazel, who's a big expert in this field? She has the confidence, I think, to say to a waiter, what system have you got? In fact, she won't eat out, actually. She won't buy sandwiches outside. But she's got the confidence to ask. So I think it's a young people thing.
Yeah.
If you look at a lot of the deaths, it's young people who just don't feel confident or feel embarrassed that they've got their friends to say, are there any allergies?
So I think, yeah. And many businesses have an allergen briefing before service starts, in a restaurant, so that everybody knows what's going on. And I think the other thing that's important is the delegation. So that the front of house 16-year-old who's doing a sort of holiday job doesn't get lumbered with a big decision about telling the customer whether there's what allergens are in the food, and it's making sure that everyone right on the front of house knows that they mustn't guess, and there's a system. They go to someone else and get that information. So if you say, well, actually, I'm sorry, I can't guarantee that your food hasn't got X in it, so I'm not going to serve you. But of course, we're starting to go into dangerous territory, because there's all the human rights people saying, well, actually, it's my human right to have a meal in whatever restaurant I like. I mean, where do we feel on that?
Is it a disability? Because
Well,
immediately it's
it may
identified
be.
as a disability. I know a lot of people are pushing it and saying it. We're going to talk about disability.
All right,
It's a disability. Then you get
Maybe-
into legislation
maybe
about
back.
you have the rights in law to be protected.
Yeah. So in a burger place, for example, where they have the burgers on a slider, they just put them in the paper, ready because of the rush. FSA are telling them that they're going to have to put a full label on those, even though they're not in the final packaging. Yes.
My view is that if you've got a company like Pret, well, let's face it, and I'm a great Pret fan, so I should say that, who have got a really talented technical team. They've got the most motivated staff you ever find anywhere in any sandwich place. So I don't know what they're giving them, but they always seem to be happy. And motivated. I'm sure it's something that they say. But if a company like that, and look at the investment they've made, millions and millions and millions, yeah? If a company like that still struggles, I just can't see how companies that don't have that facility are going to give that level of confidence.
And I think what's going to happen is everyone's going to have a may contains everything on there. So
Yeah.
I think we've got to a situation where, I think as a health professional, my biggest concern really is that it's actually going to kill someone, this bit of legislation. And I'm not going to hold back from saying that, and I hope I'm wrong. But that is my overarching worry, I think. So, on that note, shall we move on?
So hopefully this is going the way that you wanted, that we are trying to get your views, because so many times we hear a speaker talking about something, whereas I think I've certainly learned a lot from somebody. So shall we move the conversation on?
Yeah.
So what are we going to talk
We're
about?
going to talk about food safety culture. So Sterling's going to lead on this one because he's very good at it.
Behave.
I'm not going to stand in front of the screen.
Do you know, that's what Lisa says to me. She says, are you all ready for tomorrow? Yeah. She says, don't forget your white shirt. And I'm thinking, why is she on about you've got your white shirt? Because if they didn't have a screen here, she was going to make me stand here, get a projector along my back. So we do an exercise. Let's get ourselves ready. So, what we're going to be talking about is behaviour and culture, and how the landscape in our industry has changed dramatically in 5 years, where people are talking less about premises and more about people. And that's not saying you haven't got to do the premises, you've got to get the premises right first, but how you manage those premises and processes is really important. So let me try some techniques. I'm just going to share with you some techniques. So look around the room. Do you think we have a food fraudster in this room? Food fraudster. Because I'm going to tell you who in this room, using behavioural science, is more likely to commit food fraud and is more likely, therefore, to produce unsafe food. Like the Chinese melanin incident where those people died. They were doing fraud. They weren't meaning to kill people. So fraud, in my mind, means food safety. So if you can all stand up, please. Sorry, well, I can do it on crutches. Okay, everyone standing up? Okay. So let's find out who the fraudster is in this room. I'm sorry if you end up being the last person there. So if you're a woman, please sit down. The interesting thing about food fraud is women don't get involved in it. If you look at all the big cases, minor cases, for some reason, it's gender bias. Women don't get involved in fraud. Therefore, women
They work
are
behind the
likely.
scenes.
So when I say to my wife, how do we make food safety more safe? What does she say? Employ women. Get rid of the men. Okay. So I'm going to say, sit down if you're under 40. I'd have sat down and so you find out that food fraud is committed by older people for some reason. Right, sit down if you have stand up if you have a permanent contract with someone. So if you're working part-time or on a contract, sit down. Well done, John. Great. So the only people stand down got proper jobs you can't, isn't it? So I can sit down. I know you're sitting down. I was thinking it would be down. Right. So it's looking a bit dodgy for us guys, as I'm still standing. Yes. And then the other thing is to sit down if you have been employed for less than 5 years in your current position. It's looking bad. So if you use behavioural science, if you look at the groups of people who are likely to commit fraud, these are the people you've got to really look out for. So you can use behavioural science to target people at risk. So I was at the Highfield conference 2 years ago, and we did this. There were about 600 people there. And do you know who was the person left standing? Professor Chris Elliott. Out of the whole room, this is the fraudster. Chris Elliott, the guy that's telling us how to do it. And he hasn't spoken to me since. Literally won't speak to me. So that's how you can use food science. And that's what I'm trying to say is that food science and behaviour are becoming mixed. And culture is increasingly cited in reports. As you know, all these big investigations now, when they do the root cause analysis, it isn't that you didn't have a right, it isn't that it hasn't been retained, it's about the culture in the company wasn't what it should be. And I think we touched on that with allergies, isn't it? If you haven't got the right allergen culture in your business, you'll never can make any progress, whether you label or don't label, inform or don't do. Next place. So the question is, what is food safety culture? So I stand here. Hold up a green apple if you're confident you know what food safety culture is. Let's see if people really know what it is. I'm not going to ask you to explain. I'm going to ask you what it is.
You should have said you would.
Green apples, yes, about half the room. That's quite a lot of people, because I did this a conference on food safety culture 5 years ago when it started to occur. Do you know all the people in the room were microbiologists? Because they thought, oh, Sterling's going to talk about culture, and they thought, well, talk about microbiology. So I started to talk about people, and you can see people, so what's it going on about? You know, is that a gram-negative culture? Is that a gram-negative culture? But I think we're all becoming aware of it. I mean, what it is, you know, the GFSI have now said what it is. We've got a very technical definition. Then there's the common definitions, like culture is a business, it's the unwritten rules, and that's really what we do find in practice. But generally we say to people, it's how we do things around here. So there are things you don't find that are written down, but they pervade the organisation. Cute kid? Let's do the green apple test. People think, cute, did the people in the room go, oh. Before I ask you to put up your apples, I'm the kid's grandfather. So hopefully it would have been all green apples. But did you get that? Oh, feeling. And if you're talking about allergies and say, be careful, this child has an allergy, you'd think, oh, that's important. Now imagine if I put my picture up there, an old ugly guy. Any of them who go, oh? I doubt it, isn't it? Well, thank you for that, Natasha. So my picture definitely wouldn't have got an R. So what you can use is culture behaviour to connect with people. And if you're connecting on this level with, oh, isn't that a cute kid? I better look after, do the safe thing. You'll get a complete reaction if you stick another person up there like yourself. And I think what we've learned is behavioural science has changed the whole landscape of what we're doing in food now. but we are looking at ways that we can get people to do the right thing. Next slide. And what hand washing? So this is one of Lisa's bugbears. Literally, we talked about hand washing for about 5 hours over lunch once. And hand washing, how do you get people to wash their hands? So if I say to you, put your hand up if you wash your hands, a green apple, if you wash your hands after going to the toilet. So is there anyone that hasn't got a green apple? Because we all ask that. Well, we don't have a problem with it.
No, but interestingly, when you actually look at statistics of where they've actually monitored who washes their hands in washrooms, it's about 50%.
And in fact, 60% of those are men who admit to not washing their hands after going to the toilet, and 40% are women.
We did have a conversation about why that is, but we won't go into that.
Yeah. But you can illustrate it with toilets and things like that, can't you, as well? If you go into a men's toilet and a women's toilet, you think we're a different species, not a different gender. And so you can use behavioural science. So this is in a factory, you could use it in the kitchen. And if you put your wash hand basin by the door as you're coming into the factory or the kitchen, there's more likely that somebody is going to wash their hands. Why is that? Why do you think? And there's people in the room, as you can see. So, because I thought I knew what I was doing. So I stood here by this entrance, and I'm a big, ugly chap, and I was a director of the company. So if you imagine if I stood there and looked at every person washing their hands, how many people wash their hands out of 100? 100%. So I'm sitting there saying, oh, my training's brilliant. All these people are washing their hands. And then I made the mistake of hiding behind a piece of equipment and counting how many people wash their hands. And how many? 6. Hardly any of them. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? I've trained people. And if you stop someone and say, why didn't you wash your hands? They'd never say, I haven't been trained. They'd always say, that cognitive dissonance, isn't it? It's the, I'm in a hurry. I've got something else to do. Somebody's told me to do something more important. But how do you get people to trigger? You can use nudge theory. So the nudge theory I used was I got a cardboard box. I painted it white with a red stripe and I put it up here. Just a cardboard box. And then I watched. And did people wash their hands then if I'm on there? They did. Because they didn't know what this cardboard box was. And you could see people washing their hands and going, hi Sterling, how's the grandkids, okay? Talking to this cardboard box. But that's what nudge is you can change people's behaviour by just changing the environment. You don't have to train them. So, toilets, I'll try to go for toilets. Next one, please.
Oh, wait a minute. I just want to mention that when in the office block where they were doing this monitoring, they were monitoring the use of soap, and then they were converting that into a percentage of compliance. They didn't tell anyone about it at first, and they got 50% compliance. And as soon as they told everybody that they were monitoring the soap, it went up to about 85%. And then when they said there was a competition between the different floors for who could get the highest compliance, they got up to 99%. But obviously there was still some stubborn buggers who wouldn't wash their hands.
So if you go into a fly, painted on your eye. So hand up if you've been into a men's toilet. Hands up if you've been into a women's toilet. Hands up at women's toilets. And what you find is men's toilets in our factory, the floors are washed with urine, filthy. You go into the women's toilets, it look like some type of change. It was really, really tiny. Do you know, I couldn't get people to pee into urinal. And we had to employ a cleaner, and it was just a big job. So what we did is we painted a fly onto the urinal. What happened? What do you think? They ate for the fly. They stopped peeing on the floor. Just by changing the environment, suddenly all these men, instead of saying, oh, did you watch the rugby last week, were concentrating. And then after a while, they decided that they could hit the fly. So then we changed, we put targets on, kind of like the archery targets. And then all of a sudden, so it started to go, we put the archery, and then people were again trying to hit the target. So you can use little bits of nudge theory to change people's behaviour. We had an office that had the best lift in London. It was a research place. And we were trying to get people to use the stairs and not the lift because it was a beautiful lift. And we used to say to people, don't use the lift, use the stairs, it's healthy for you. And how many people use the lift? Stairs. Nobody would use the stairs. So all we did is we painted footsteps leading from the entrance to the staircase. And everyone used the stairs. So then you didn't even say don't use the lift. It was just nudge theory, as people just subconsciously walk along where the steps are and use the staircase. So it's a really powerful tool to change behaviour. Next please. So if you're driving around a corner in Denmark and you saw this in the road, you might hit the brakes. Next please. But it's an optical illusion. And so many areas in safety now, you can see people using this nudge theory to get safety, rather than lecturing people, training people. Because I think training is a waste of time, to be honest with you. Unless it changes behaviour, then you're just wasting your time. And I've done that for 40 years, literally trained people, walked out the room, thought, job done. Whereas really, then they go down and don't follow the practice at night, when there's no one in there. So if it's pret-a-manger, and it is, I don't know, 7 o'clock at night and there's just one person doing some work. If they're on their own, that's if you know you've got a good food safety culture. They'll do the right thing when you're not there. Because I guarantee you, if you're there standing over them, they'll always do the